So let's talk hurling. The most famous of Celtic sports, this Irish game has been played since ancient times, and is alive and well today. And it has had a fascinating influence on Irish history and culture. So what is hurling? Hurling is kind of like a mix between lacrosse and field hockey. It's similar to Gaelic football, in fact. The two sports even use the same pitch, a field about 160 yards long and 100 yards wide. H-shaped goalposts with a net coming down from the crossbar are set up on each end of the field. These posts are 23 feet high and 21 feet apart. The game is played by teams of 15 with 35-minute halves. As a result, hurling is nicknamed one of the fastest sports in the world. The object of the game is for players to use a stick called a Hurley to hit a small ball called a sleeter between the opponent's goalposts. Players score 1 point by hitting the sleeter between the goalpost above the crossbar, and they score 3 points by hitting it under the crossbar into the net. Players can use their Hurleys to hit the ball from the air or from the ground. Instead of picking the sleeter up from the ground, though, players have to use the Hurley to scoop it up. The player is allowed to catch the ball with their hand out of the air or slap it with their open palm to another player. Even though players can hold the ball in their hand, they can't move more than 4 steps without incurring a foul. Instead, players must balance or bounce the sleeter at the end of their stick, which takes incredible amounts of focus and dexterity. So if you think this sounds easy so far, try this. While doing all this balancing, opponents can tackle you. The only rules are that an opponent must lead with their shoulders and keep 1 foot on the ground. Only the goalkeeper is safe from tackling, which is why they wear a different colored jersey. Despite being a sport that's been played for centuries, only recently, in 2010, were helmets made a requirement to combat the violent injuries caused by the sport. When the game is played internationally, a composite of the rules is used, making a hybrid of hurling with its Scottish cousin shinty. Both games have a similar basis and undoubtedly share some roots. The hybrid game uses the hurling pitch and goalposts, but players aren't allowed to catch or stop the ball with their hands unless they're the goalkeeper. A player can also score 2 points if they hit a stationary ball on the ground over the crossbar. So where did hurling come from? Well, evidence suggests hurling could have been played as far back as 3,000 years ago. Over the years, a few different variations of the game have been played in different regions. However, no one really knows exactly what the ancient game was like or who played it first. The oldest records actually come to us from Irish mythology. One legend involves the Firbolg, the original inhabitants of Ireland, being invaded by the Tuatha De Danann. Before their ultimate showdown, the two tribes played a game of hurling, which, no surprise, ended in violent blows. Another more widely known legend involves Ireland's greatest mythical hero, Cuchulain, and explains how he got that name. The story goes that one day a blacksmith named Cuchulain came to Emain Macha and invited Crolhur Macnessa, the king of Ulster, to his home for a feast. Cuchulain asked Macnessa not to bring all of his men, but only a few companions, since Cuchulain's home was so small and could not hold them all. Macnessa graciously accepted and set out for Cuchulain's home with his chosen retainers. On his way, he passed by a field where a young boy named Setanta was playing with some other boys. They were playing the knockdown game, and Macnessa noted how none of the lads was strong enough to push over Setanta. Afterwards, the frustrated boys agreed to play a game of hurling, all of them competing against Setanta by himself. Macnessa was very impressed, and invited Setanta to join him at the feast. Setanta accepted, but asked if he could finish his hurling game first. Macnessa allowed this, saying he would meet Setanta at Cuchulain's house. Now, Macnessa arrived at the hall of Cuchulain, upon which Cuchulain asked if Macnessa had all of his men with him, or if he was expecting any more. Macnessa had meanwhile forgotten all about Setanta, and replied no. Cuchulain then let loose his guard dog, who was said to be as big as a pony and could take on a small group of men. Later, after Setanta had finished his hurling game, he came to Cuchulain's home. There before the door was the mighty dog. Upon seeing Setanta approaching, it howled and pounced to rip the boy apart. Only armed with his hurley stick and sleeter, the boy reacted in a flash, hitting his ball with all his might. The sleeter whined through the air and struck the great dog squarely in the forehead, killing it instantly. After hearing the commotion, Macnessa remembered Setanta and rushed out with Cuchulain to see what had happened. Macnessa was relieved to see the boy alive. However, Cuchulain was devastated that his dog had died. Setanta, seeing the distress on Cuchulain's face, offered to guard Cuchulain's home until he raised a new guard dog. From then on, Setanta was known as Cuchulain, or Cuchulain's hound. Now, just because hurling was played in mythic times doesn't mean it stayed popular. We do know it must have been played consistently, however. It was at least popular enough that in the 12th century, Normans occupying Ireland outlawed it. Hurling only survived this period thanks to landowners sponsoring matches on their private estates. Interest in the game steadily waned over the centuries, especially during the Great Famine of the 19th century. No surprise there. The only people playing the sport were the upper classes, and most of the everyday folk were unable to participate. But a shift was on the horizon. It was during this time that the Gaelic Athletic Association, the GAA, was beginning to form. This was the group that standardized hurling, but they actually did much more than that. So what was the GAA? Basically, in 1884, a man named Michael Cusack outlined a plan to form an association with 3 objectives. 1. To bring about the organization of Irish sport by Irish men. 2. To draft new rules for native Irish games. And 3. To devise ways to foster recreation for Irish people. Cusack convinced other notable figures of the time to become patrons of his planned GAA. People like athlete Maurice Davin, Archbishop Thomas Croke, Charles Stewart Parnell, and Michael Davitt. The GAA was focused on supporting Gaelic sports, but their underlying goal was much more broad. The group wanted to boost Irish identity by bringing Irish sports to the working classes. Police officers and members of the British Army were not allowed to join the association, and this made it a perfect place for the Irish Republican Brotherhood, the IRB, to meet and recruit. And in turn, this caused a split within the GAA itself. Physically rebellious IRB members were pitted against pro-Home Rule men who were seeking a more peaceful resolution to the political turmoil in the country. Some members left the association in 1887, in fact, when an IRB leader, Edward Bennett, was elected president. But this split didn't last very long, as Archbishop Croke helped quell the tensions between the two parties. To be clear, the GAA was not technically a political organization, but many of its members were involved in other groups like the IRB. The police noted that many aggressive protesters were also members of the GAA. This led to a law that no sports matches could be held without an official permit. The GAA responded by telling its members not to apply for any permits at all, and they threatened anyone who did with suspension. Then on August 4th, 1918, the GAA openly defied the orders by staging matches all over the country, without a single permit. Around 50,000 people participated in this protest, which would come to be called Gaelic Sunday. And it worked. The authorities backed down. Meanwhile, with all this going on, the sport of hurling itself flourished. For instance, hurling became so popular that women wanted to play too, no longer content to just stay on the sidelines. In 1904, a small group of women had created an offshoot of hurling called camogie, and they formed their own association to promote the game. World War I stalled progress, but by 1932, camogie was well established enough to hold the first All-Ireland Senior Camogie Championship. Fast forward to today, and you will see both hurling and camogie are immensely popular in Ireland, with championships being played every year in different leagues. Their popularity doesn't stop at the borders either, as clubs for both sports have appeared in North America and other places. Oh, and despite its rough beginnings, the GAA is also still going strong.
These are our games. These are our people. This is GAA country.
It runs the National Hurling League with about 35 teams competing for the Dr. Croke Cup. So there you have it, a very, very quick synopsis of what hurling is all about. Have you ever played? If so, tell us in the comments. If you want to play, you might want to check and see if there's a club in your area. If you're interested in other Irish content, please check out our playlist over here. If you want to know more about kilts in Ireland, check out this video here. In the meantime, have a wonderful day and remember to celebrate your heritage every chance you get.